Today we're going to talk about it's maybe a relatively new concept. We've been doing it for years for a number of agents in a pre-listing inspection. And they were a huge boon for a number of people in the beginning of the outbreak when things were getting clamped down, to have a house that had been pre-inspected, where you had information that the buyers could work with in a situation where they couldn't even go in the house. During the pandemic, we had a waiver to operate. So we were going in doing Zoom videos or FaceTime calls with clients to try to help them see houses because it was really crazy. So what we learned through all that is we can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And the more prepared we are for anything, the better off we're going to be. So the reason this is called the Prelisting Preparedness is we want to be as out front as we can in this industry. And that includes you as a real estate agent, and it includes us in this industry. We're going to talk a little about waiving inspections today and stuff like that. So all this stuff is really important. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint here. And like I said, you should be seeing now, share, is that. So again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here as a resource for agents. Are you guys seeing all this, the PowerPoint? Okay, good. So what is a pre-listing inspection? It's no different. It's the same inspection that we would do for a buyer. We're not pulling any punches here. If the house is broke, it's broke. If it's not broke, it's not broke. But we're doing essentially the same report, the same inspection for that we do for a buyer. It just gives us the opportunity to get that information out there. It's typically going to be a home inspection, and really popular are stucco inspections because there's so much potential for a disaster on the stucco side of things. So we do a ton of pre-listing stucco inspections. But it's the home inspection piece has really picked up. I'd say we do 2 or 3 of these a week. So it's become quite prevalent in the industry, and we're not the only ones doing this, but this has just been our experience. At times it can be more defensive. So sometimes we see something in a home inspection that we get concerned that somebody's going to have an issue with. So we can write something into the report that describes the house in a slightly more positive light. And we're thinking about that as we're doing these inspections, because you're certainly going to be telling them bad things about the house, but you want to at least put in there some good stuff about things that we noted in the house. So it's you ever heard of the sandwich? You know, you put just a piece of bread on each side and the bad stuff in the middle. At least that's what my mom did. It helps the seller better understand the inspection process. It's amazing to me at times that people are ill-informed in this process. Obviously, we have seasoned buyers, but there's certainly a number of people that don't understand what the state of Pennsylvania's inspection law means, what an actual inspection is all about. So we can help walk them through that process, and it helps them to understand what the inspection is all about. Now, I got to tell you that a lot of the sellers aren't totally thrilled with what comes up in the report, but that's my job, is to handle them, to work through with them what issues are big, what issues are not big. But at the end of the day, the information is coming one way or another. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Why is it important? Information is power, but timing is so more important than just the information. Finding out that Dogecoin is going to go from 5 cents to 74 cents, you know, the day after it does it is not really helpful. Knowing it the day before it does it is really helpful. So the timing of the data that we get to the client is critical, rather than wait until the buyer does an inspection and we find out that all these things need to be addressed one way or another within 3 weeks before the closing table comes. So it's really advantageous from a timing standpoint, because the sooner you know something, the better we can plan around it. It helps set realistic expectations. The buyer often has very unrealistic expectations of what their house is all about. And it's not anybody's job really other than ours to help them to understand what it is their limitations are. Now you go into a pre-listing environment and you're looking in the closets and they're full of stuff and the house is dirty, and you're telling them that they need to prepare their house from a showing standpoint. We're going to tell them how to prepare their house from an inspection standpoint. So this is what the seller's opinion of the house is. I'm going to date myself here a little bit. This is the mansion that was on the Beverly Hillbillies back in the day. This is what the buyer thinks their house looks like. Excuse me, the seller. I screwed that up. This is what the seller thinks their house looks like. This is what the buyer, if you're, this is from the Golden Girls. So this is what the buyer thinks about their house that they're selling. This is the bank's opinion. That's the appraiser's opinion of the house. And that's my opinion of the house, usually. So the opinions need to be adjusted and aligned a lot of times. And a good home inspection is a great way to do that. So it brings everybody's expectations into alignment. There's no perfect house. I've been looking, I stopped counting these at 10,000. We've got 7 guys in the field doing thousands of inspections every year. I still have yet to see the perfect house. You know, we're doing one today that's 16,000 square feet, multiple millions of dollars, and it won't be perfect either. But the idea is that we need to align everybody's expectations and help everybody understand what it is that they have. Waiving inspections is a bad idea. PAR has put out several documents on this. Unfortunately, in this market, you have no choice sometimes, and we get all that. The problem is that your risk factor as an agent and the seller's risk factor goes up exponentially when you waive all the inspections, because when the buyer gets in there and realizes the things that, and maybe the seller didn't even know, it's not your job to know these things, and maybe the seller wasn't aware of some of these things, but when it becomes problematic for the buyer, then litigation has already ticked up according to PAR. A big part of what I do personally is a lot of litigation work for buyers and sellers and builders and against builders. And that has certainly picked up, where I'm getting a lot more contact from lawyers about litigation in these failure to disclose cases. So your risk factor goes up exponentially when you waive inspections. A pre-listing inspection helps to limit that. We're going to assume some of that risk. Our inspections are basically covered by an insurance policy, which also steps up and covers you for wrongful referral. If there's something that goes wrong after we've inspected a house, whether it's a pre-listing or for a buyer, any good inspection company should really be interested if there's a complaint or an issue coming forward after the fact, and to deal with that. So we're going to help to reduce your liability as an agent. We're going to reduce the liability of the seller by putting this stuff in a disclosure format. You're literally going to give the buyer, once you get an interested party, a copy of this inspection report, and you're going to consider it part of your disclosure to them. So it really helps that. The buyers will feel better about waiving inspections on their end if they have inspections already on your end. Before this whole crazy market, we were seeing people waiving 50 to 60% of the time. Buyers were, because our inspection reports are legitimate. They're not pulling any punches. They're telling you what's up with the house. So we're seeing a lot more of that now. I'd say most of the agents that we're working with are seeing 75 or better % of the buyers are waiving their inspections because we have an inspection report in front of them. Timing usually is a big question people are always wondering about. I'd say that 6 months is typically a good window. So we want to try to do the inspection reasonably close to when it's going on listing. Give us some time to deal with some things. But basically a 6 month window is pretty good. Well, since you're selling a house in about 11.5 hours with 32 offers, that window isn't bad. As the market more normalizes, then that 6 month window becomes a little bit more relevant. There's some myths about pre-listing inspection. I want to cover this. This is a handout that we have. So I've sent this over so you guys can, again, are free to take this. It's not in this format exactly. It's on a letterhead, but again, so you guys can market it and you guys can put your own marketing material on it. The biggest misconception, I would say, is that somehow they think they're going to get this laundry list of this honey-do list. Now, we made the mistake at one of our Christmas parties to have some the agents that were here, we don't have them at our house anymore, but for a long time we had them at our house. I let the agents inspect my house, and my wife still breaks out that list occasionally and says, what about all these things that are wrong with our house? So it's not going to be a laundry list. To me, it's far more a disclosure list. There may be some things that need to get corrected. I would say anything safety related is going to be kind of be at the top of the list. One of the biggest things that comes up on these is mold, or the potential for mold. If you want to go on the EPA's website, they discuss how to clean mold. So, you know, if we see that in a pre-listing inspection, it's hugely advantageous to deal with this on your own terms. If a buyer finds that problem, they're not going to be amused by it, and they're going to want you to hire in a big crew and all that stuff. And the EPA says that basically if it's under, I think it's 9 square feet of mold, which is a significant amount of mold, you can generally clean it up yourself, and they've got instructions how to do that. So we want to definitely try to tackle certain things, mold being primary among them, electrical issues, things like that that are safety related. But other than that, you know, handrails and a roof that's only got 3 to 5 years left in it, that to me is a disclosure piece. If you tell them that the roof only has 3 to 5 years left in it, and they come back and say, hey, the roof only has 3 to 5 years left in it because my inspector said so, then you're like, yeah, we told you it had 3 to 5 years left in it. So there's a lot of things that really, to me, have become much more of a disclosure piece than a call to action. The next myth is the buyers are going to be put off by the information. Remember, we do a ton of these every day, and we over the years have really found that buyers are put off by what they didn't know about. You know, mayhem is okay as long as you know it's going to be mayhem. So when you go into a house and it's the stuff that they didn't know about that they find out later, either by another inspector, or worse than that, after the closing, they go to do something and it doesn't work. That's the stuff that really infuriates buyers. I have watched buyers review these reports. I've walked buyers through this process many times, and we're going to talk about how that plays in here in a minute. They really don't worry about the things they know about. It's that lack of information or that lack of understanding that that really aggravates them. So we have not seen buyers be put off by the information. They are actually grateful that this information was put in front of them. The buyers will hire their own inspector will find list. Now, quite honestly, in this marketplace, that has just simply not been the predominant answer. However, when we get back to a more normalized market, certainly that's a possibility. We definitely emphatically feel that every buyer should have the opportunity to walk a property with an inspector. A good home inspector is so much more than just a checklist of bad things with the house. They're talking about how to change the filter and the heater, how to turn the water off in an emergency. They're educating their buyer, they're answering questions. So we do feel that every buyer should have an inspector walk the property with them, and if they haven't done a pre-listing inspection, then do an inspection. But the process is difficult in certain environments with shutdowns and COVID and the current market and all that stuff. So we feel that that's something that we can help with as long as we've done a pre-listing inspection. And we're going to talk about how we're going to help you with that. The information in the report will increase my exposure. We talked about this briefly before. The report's going to limit your exposure. We assume that risk. Our insurance covers us for these types of problems. And in all the tens of thousands of inspections we've done, we've never been sued, and I knock on wood, and my day's coming sooner or later. It's just a matter of when. But we are very responsive to problems. It's not that nothing ever goes wrong after our inspection. It's typically something that nobody could have predicted, but it doesn't matter that that's the case. The buyer's still upset. So we're there to help reduce everybody's exposure, including the seller, because the seller can simply say, we hired Spotlight to do, or some other company to do this inspection for us. Here's their information. We went above and beyond the call of duty. You can't accuse us of not trying to sell something or disclose something. Now, if they truly, you know, park the car over top of the hole in the garage floor that goes down 30 feet, then maybe they could be liable to that. But there are instances where I think the sellers have failed to disclose things that they knew that were serious, and we're typically involved in those cases. Pre-listing inspections are expensive. They're just a typical inspection. They don't cost any more, they don't cost any less. The value of having a buyer that is already aware of the deficiencies or problems in the house and gets right to closing is invaluable. The proper use of pre-listing inspection will reduce stress, potential delays in the closing process. If there are substantial problems that are covered by the pre-listing inspection, you can deal with it on your own terms. If substantial issues become apparent in typical inspection, the buyer terminates the deal or they ask for compensation repairs that may be unreasonable. Now, I often joke in my inspections that I've never seen a buyer ask $10,000 for a $10,000 problem. They want $10,000 plus enough to go to Disneyland, and maybe they'll accept that. But worse than that, you're going to terminate. So, you know, that is a very big disruption. The domino effect on that is potentially staggering. The biggest one I ever heard was 8 deals. It blew up, you know, 1 deal fell apart. That blew up 8 deals down the line. Today, we're less likely to have all those clauses in there that get you, you know, mortgage contingencies and home sale contingencies. But back in the day, that was pretty significant problem. The process is the same. Set it up the same way. I'm speaking about most inspectors are going to have the same process for this. You call the office, email. We have 6 different ways to schedule an inspection with us. Use any one of them. You can go on our website, email, call. We don't discourage the owner. A lot of times they don't, but we don't discourage the owner from participating in the inspection as long as they're not disruptive. But I think it's important sometimes for the owner to see what we're seeing and have us explain to them what we're seeing and why we have a concern about it. Certainly, if they're not following us around, we're going to go and get them if we see anything serious that we think needs you know, further explanation. So we're going to walk them through the thought process and maybe what some of the solutions might be, some of the costs associated with it. Remember, we're trying to take the pressure off of you. We don't want them calling you immediately after this inspection to say, yeah, I got to find out about all this different stuff. We're going to try to answer as many of these questions for them as we can. The report's issued just like a typical report. It should look the same. It will look the same. We're happy to review the report with you because more often than not, you're not going to be there for this, although you're welcome. For the owner and a prospective buyer, once you get a prospective buyer on the line, we're happy to have that buyer. I'm going to give you my cell phone number at the end of this. Have that buyer contact the office or call me directly. And, you know, we may have to set up a time slot where I can be in front of the computer to look at it. But we're happy to answer questions for that buyer. Remember, we're trying to get you to the finish line. If we're not an asset to you, if we're not helping you get to the finish line, then we haven't done our job. So talking to a prospective buyer about the information in the report, I think is critical. We will meet the buyers on site and walk them through the report. That's an important piece of this. So we offer in this letter, one of the letters that we had sent you is basically something to leave behind to the house during showings, or give to prospective buyers. But for half the original inspection fee, generally about $250 to $300, we'll meet the prospective buyer once it's under contract. I don't want to meet every, you know, theoretical buyer you have, but once it's under contract, we'll meet the prospective buyer on site, one of my guys, and we'll walk them through. Typically, it's the guy that did the home inspection originally, because we're not re-inspecting the house. We're simply reviewing the report and answering any of their questions and teaching them about the house. If, however, some repairs were made and they were identified to us, we can certainly look at them and explain what was done to the prospective buyer. And then we will reissue the report. We won't change the report. We may make some notes about things like if, for example, we saw the handrails were missing on the basement steps, for example, and now there's handrails on the basement steps, we can add a comment in there, you know, handrails were installed post-inspection, and just note it in the report. But we're going to reissue the report to the buyer. And that's important because that aligns us with them. That gets their coverage, our coverage, basically on them. They have every bit of, they are our client then. If their name is not on the report, if any of you have ever looked at a home inspection report, one of the first lines in the inspection report is this report is only valuable or usable by the person whose name appears on it. If you go in to sue me later and your name isn't on a report, you're going to have a heck of a time because you weren't the owner. And that's one of the problems in the industry. It's not something we're going to solve here today or probably at any point. But once I issue this report on a particular property, we see them time and time again for years by people that we have no knowledge of. And so that's just an industry issue. I don't really worry about it, but you know, you having a report in your hand that has some other guy's name on it or some other girl's name on it isn't going to help you if there's a real problem.